On November 23rd, 2025, Lisa Noelle Voldeng posted a story on Substack entitled, "Don't Worry, Boys Are Hard to Find." That post and the 6 audio recordings embedded within it explore the horrific first-hand accounts of child sex trafficking experienced by William Sascha Riley. The story then exploded on social media in January of this year. Since that time, William Sascha Riley and Lisa Voldeng have become topics of ceaseless discussion, debate, and concern. I have the honor of speaking with Lisa Noelle Voldeng today. Lisa, welcome to Policy Watch.
Art, hello. Good to be here.
Lisa, you have done something that very few people will ever experience, and I suspect you did it quite unintentionally and probably unexpectedly. You very suddenly broke out on social media. Your interviews went viral, and in a very short time, you have become almost a household name. At the same time, there's not much that is yet known about you. I don't know if that air of mystery is intentional, but I do know that a lot of people are very curious to know more about you and your background. Can you tell me a bit about who you are and what you do and what drives you?
Well, I love to build. I've loved to build for a lot longer than covered wagon days. And my background, I cut my teeth in advanced telecommunications industry. I worked at a company that was acquired by Hewlett Packard, spent some time there. Micro intricacies of development, engineering, human factors related. And at the same time, I was working on different media projects and wrote my first screenplay, Pure Joy, when I was 12 years old. And I'm as comfortable creating economic models as new kinds of media and different approaches to media. And I say that just sort of to contextualize because it's really for me about building for the joy of building. My focus has long been justice. And so all of my work, I've run my own companies since the 1990s, and I've worked with engineering companies, lots of high tech companies, media companies on different kinds of projects, and started my own companies. One of my companies was a research firm. We focused on the intersect of entertainment and media technology and shifts in markets, developments, culture, because of shifts in how folks behave, largely impacted by the internet. So, my background, again, the commonality is joy of building to what we're capable of rather than what we think we are. Because I do believe that it's right and just and fair and noble to build a better world.
Well, I share that belief with you. I also I can relate to what you say when you talk about the joy of building, because when I was quite young, our family built our house. I was
Mhm.
12 when we started to build that house. And something I noticed from that point on for the rest of my life is that when you build something, what we'd always do after we built a new wall or we a new countertop, whatever the stage of our project was at, um, we that night we'd all stand around and just look at it and look at it from different angles, different lighting. There is something just innately joyful about building, and that's just a microcosm. You put a new counter in the kitchen or something, you've made your own world a little better.
Or
And then
building a fort,
and it,
building a
right.
building a fort, building a raft to sail on a river. Absolutely,
Yeah.
I think indicative of, for me, what's immensely important is childlike, infinitely wise, childlike joy and wonder. That's imperative to me to always nurture and to cultivate.
Which probably brings us to my next question, which is, Lisa, you're single-handedly responsible for bringing the William Sascha Riley story to the attention of millions of people. I think that's very safe to say, millions of people around the world. How did you first come across William Sascha Riley, and how is it that you gained enough of Sasha's trust that they were willing to open up and share such an excruciatingly difficult story with you?
Good questions. Well, a lot of my work these days has been focused on the future of law and the future of justice. And in the course of some of my work, my assessments, I was reviewing some materials and I came across Sasha. Sasha had posted online. And I've spent a heap of time rapidly assessing the credibility of individuals and of allegations. And I knew that Sasha was talking honestly. So I thanked him for behaving courageous. I told him that I thought he would likely find more justice internationally. And I said that if he'd like help, that I would help. And he contacted me. We had some initial discussion. I spent a bit more time reviewing some of the background on Sasha. And then when we spoke, my perspective was, I told him that, that I run a company, Media and Technology Lab, and I've spent time on lots of volunteer projects, justice related, and that my approach would be quite different. That I'm more of an advocate, an ally, and that's the perspective. And what I said to him specifically, I said I'm sort of more like a king of yore that rides shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers in battle. And there was just that sort of natural trust right there, which I'm extremely ferocious about shepherding and protecting. I treat folks with dignity and respect. And, I knew how much Sasha had struggled. And like I say, I stand shoulder to shoulder. So that's the approach that I took, and then when I recorded our conversations, it was from a perspective that I knew that I was recording conversations that could get used preliminarily in some cases, different tranches in terms of, some of the justice projects I'm working on, and that I knew that it would be right at some point to publish them because there's so much that malevolent individuals have attempted to cover up in order to stall justice. And I knew that at some point it would be the right thing to do, that lots of good and decent folks were wanting to hear something of the truth so that they could understand, so that they themselves could stand more easily and shake off the myopia of decades and decades of false narratives regarding these cases more easily.
Well, it certainly does seem to me that a growing awareness of that phenomenon is developing amongst society everywhere, not just in the United States of America, but in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
People don't trust their own governments anymore. They don't trust their legal systems, which actually brings me to my next question. So there are, of course, detractors out there. There are people who hear this story and will suggest, without knowing much of anything one way or another, that this is a fake story. And while I accept that Sasha's story contains many allegations, which as of yet have not been proven in any court, but but you nonetheless seem to have a great deal of faith in the credibility of these accounts that Sasha is relaying. So what is it about Sasha that instilled in you not only a desire to help, but also enough confidence that you were willing to use your platform to share Sasha's story?
Good question. I, I'm not sure that there's a lot of English language words to answer the question. I would say that I just knew it was the right thing to do. And that I knew that Sasha was honest, was talking honestly, and that Sasha, you know, has demonstrated consistently um, a desire to stand up to and to try to do the right thing and to help others. And I just knew it was the right thing to do. It's like without question. Like I say, I had a sense of trust. I spent time to assess, but I knew, in fact, something that might help sort of contextually when I spoke to one of the archdeacons at one of the churches in Canada, and I spoke to him about Sasha's case within a few days. And our conversation, he said that he knew that Sasha was talking honestly just from his conversation with me. And we spent time visiting, and he's listened to the testimony, and he said that he himself felt a sense of kindredness to Sasha and a desire to help. And I think what's so important of a reminder, especially considering how we're so often inundated with misdis and malinformation, is to focus on discernment. It's like discernment is so vitally important and so often forgotten, and in some cases discounted by those who spend a lot of time attempting to distract individuals so they don't spend time to discern themselves.
I hear what you're saying, and you raise an interesting point to my mind, and that is the difference between this person believing someone and a court of law believing someone. And if a court of law accepts an account, then we literally say it was proven. It's proven. And we say that because a court of law has accepted testimony. Now, I will accept that in a court of law, the testimony is tested. A witness is cross-examined. And the trier of fact gets to listen to the cross-examination and evaluate how a witness responds to that cross-examination. But at the end of the day, we accept that if a court of law accepts somebody's testimony, then it is proven. But until then, everything is just an allegation. Fair enough. I get that. But I also like to highlight that difference to people, because I think when most people use the term proven, they hear that word or they say that word and they're thinking, well, it's a fact. It's been established. This is real. But it's still opinion. It's still an opinion of somebody's testimony.
Well, you raise a lot of important points. That's like what I've often tried to speak about is that, firsthand testimony, victim and witness testimony is firsthand evidence, and in lots of jurisdictions and can result in convictions. And when you look at sort of the notion of what's considered proven or not, the difficulty in now, first of all, there's lots of folks that I've worked with that work in government that are righteous and they try to do the right thing. Some countries more easily than others. In a country where the legal system is under assault, is a very different situation. I mean, the United States, there's several pedophiles that are attempting to use the United States government apparatus, like the pedophiles use their bodies to assault children, which is deeply problematic, especially because they're the abusers that the American voters have supposedly entrusted to uphold the American laws, to enforce the laws. So you're in a situation there where the abusers
Yeah.
are the investigators, the abusers are in control of the American law enforcement. So that's an entirely different, from my perspective, how the situation is handled is entirely different than most other countries. Now, something I've long experienced concern about with the legal system in lots of countries is the notion that the victim isn't credible unless an individual that is thought to have credibility states that the victim is credible. It's like, that's just not how justice is supposed to work. A crime's committed, the crime should get investigated, the perpetrator should suffer the appropriate punishments. It's very straightforward. In some countries like the United States, the sort of murkiness, you have like more time spent on lawyers defending positions than arguing the facts of the case. Then you have good lawyers like Jack Smith that are trying to argue the facts of the case, when all these scurrilous lawyers are attempting to use the mechanisms of the legal system to stall cases, to tamper with evidence, to obstruct, and to constantly demonize the victims, which is against the law. I would argue that coercion is against the law. In fact, from my perspective, coercion is one of the primary means of attempted enslavement, of slavery during the modern ages. Is different than 200 years ago visible metal chains on necks on boats of individuals shipped against what they wanted to other countries. Coercion is extremely insidious and often used by individuals to insidiously coerce other individuals into unwilling complicitness, collusion, and in some cases silencing. Certainly, in regards to the survivors that I've been helping, of which there's probably at least 20 or 25 survivors my team and I are helping so far, and more coming forward weekly. And not just from the United States, different countries. Discernment and conscience. First, the discernment is imperative. And what I've found in my experience is that individuals of conscience are capable of discernment, and individuals without conscience aren't capable of discernment at all, and generally aren't interested, and in the worst cases, want to actively harm the innocent. And in the specifics regarding conscience, what I find with Sasha Riley and also with George Tonks, individuals that have listened, that experience a conscience, they discern that Sasha's talking truthfully. They discern my integrity. They discern that George is talking truthfully, and they want to help. And there's been an immense outpouring of offers to help and of support. Some individuals that experience a conscience, I find, if they've been told over and over repeatedly what to believe by others, whether by, you know, journalists with an agenda or politicians with an agenda or relatives with an
Hmm.
agenda, some of those individuals is like they're discerning something of the truth, but then they're waiting for an individual they were told has credibility or that they think has credibility to then come and tell them something. And in the United States, with the pedophile network, is a very, very insidious attempt to control the narrative. The pedophiles spent lots of time, lots of the pedophiles work at some of the media companies, finance companies. They try to control the narrative so that there's
Hmm.
this constant attempts to discredit the victims, to silence the victims, to attempt to discredit the supporters of the victims, and to perpetuate the continued attempted crimes of the network and the network's attempted crimes to cover up decades and decades of crimes, which, again, this truth speaks for itself. Justice will not wait. So the pedophiles, the pedophile enablers are sort of in a last gasp, extinction gasp, and very loud about.
Mhm.
So something that I simmer with a lot is how to help good folks to be able to discern more easily for themselves so they aren't prey to every charlatan false prophet that tries to lead them astray.
Yeah. And these days, more than ever, we all have to do that. And it's become a common theme. We look at what's happening today, for example, with ICE, Renee Good, Alex Preddy, and the official narrative is, Renee Good tried to run this guy over. But then we see the video and we see a fellow shooting through the passenger side window.
We see a murder that we won't deny, that we refuse to deny. We witnessed a murder.
Yeah. I witnessed a murder. It's
And
simple. I've witnessed those two murders, Alex Preddy, Renee Good. And I don't care if you're the King of England. I don't care who you are. If you're going to tell me that Renee Good and Alex Preddy weren't murdered, then you've just discredited yourself. You're not going to convince me. You're not going to persuade me, but perhaps those people persuade some people.
yeah, it's sort of an irony. It's an irony regarding credibility because, the politicians that denied that Alex was murdered and that Renee was murdered, those politicians lose credibility. Those politicians didn't have credibility to begin with, but the notion of credibility, there's these individuals that are attempting to enforce their opinions on others, force their opinions on others, and use the United States government apparatus to attempt to enforce their opinions, fraudulent opinions, and they themselves don't have credibility, and they're in a position where they're desperately trying to question everyone trying to do the right thing's credibility, and not just in the United States and lots of countries, ironically. And the truth speaks for itself, and like I've said, justice will not wait, and there are more good folks standing up than there are pedophiles. And what's utterly insane to me, even that there's anyone that would in any way question a victim in the face of the crimes the pedophiles have committed and are alleged to commit. It's like very straightforward to look and say, well, gee, okay, what's worse than child murder? To stand and behave like, I mean, my concern, and there's lots of good
Mm-hmm.
Americans, decent Americans, and how I look at what's going on is like, gee, I'm going to help those Americans. I'm going to help those Americans that are trying to stand up and do the right thing. It's almost like some of them are experiencing Stockholm syndrome. Some of them, they're just like shocked from the extremities of abuse over several years. In fact, several months ago, I would try to speak to some folks, about,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like with the Trump administration. Trump behaves towards the Republican Party like an abusive husband. And I think a lot of the Republicans, because there are Republicans that do try to stand up and do the right thing, they're shocked. They're not used to getting abused like Trump has abused Trump's wives and Trump has abused children. And it's like almost like they don't know how to react or respond. And, that's the case I've seen with a lot of the Americans. So there's mechanisms to enforce law, but a lot of the Americans seem to experience
Mm-hmm.
difficulties enforcing the law, and, criminal law enforcement. there's laws that can be enforced at the state level and at the federal level. And because this is a case where, in the case of Sasha's experience, that there's sitting United States politicians that are involved, that, a reasonable investigation, that all of those individuals are removed, they're held without bail pending investigation, considering the severity of the allegations.
It certainly seems to my mind that something should be done about that. As I've found, I've probably written this comment a good, whatever, 100 times, that not only do we need to investigate these allegations, we need to investigate the agents and the officers and the attorneys who did not investigate these allegations when they first came about. That has to happen, and we have to find out
Absolutely.
what is underneath all this. What's determining what complaints, what allegations get investigated and what doesn't. There must be a word. There must be terminology amongst law enforcement for individuals or cases where you just don't go down that road. No, that's quote something. They must have a way of saying that, yeah, no, we don't deal with that case because it's related to this network. It's related to the wealthy and the powerful.
Well, the survivors that I'm helping, and lots of them are American, in every case, they tried reporting. So they would contact police, they would contact the various law officials, informant officials, various law enforcement officials in the various states that they resided, and they didn't get anywhere. They didn't get anywhere. Some of them experienced difficulties even reporting to law enforcement because the initial intake sessions, there was such opinion bias.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of them, in all honesty, lost hope in finding justice in the United States. Some are still hopeful. They're hopeful when they see, some of the folks that work as senators standing up, and some of the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
representatives standing up, the governor standing up. There's hopefulness, absolutely. And I've been in dialogue with folks at Senator Wyden's office and at one of the committees, staffers at one of the committees, and they're fiercely committed to investigating and to finding some path to justice. And, there are a lot of good folks like them that are extremely integrous and diligent and dedicated and working very, very hard. So I think that's important perspective.
That
But there is this sort of larger issue in terms of like the city and state law enforcement in some of the states is extremely compromised.
it certainly seems to be the case. I, I'm I'm glad though you've provided that glimmer of hope about the fact that there are good people still operating in government. And that reminds me of a question I had about Sasha, who has arguably been through the very worst things imaginable. Um, Yet Sasha seems to have come through it, obviously scarred, yet just as obviously a kind, considerate, decent person. And the experiences that Sasha recounts would surely have destroyed most people and made them quite bitter and jaded. How do you suppose Sasha not only survived these experiences, but seems to have remained truly committed to being a good person?
Well, if you're a good person, you're a good person. And, Sasha's decent. Sasha tries to do the right thing. And, that's extremely important. Sasha has joked and said he survives just to spite individuals, but that's I don't know that, spite is enough to carry you through those sort of situations, And certainly I don't want to get into such a discussion, but there is, something higher, and that's important to honor.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are a lot of folks that are like gobsmacked that Sasha even survived.
Right.
And
Right.
I find that, in the case, some of the survivors that I'm helping, there's similarities with their cases. Similarly, there's corroborative experiences. In some cases, some of the perpetrators. And in each case, it's like some of the cases I'm thinking of specifically, um, late 1970s, early 1980s, they're some of the only survivors. All the rest of the children were murdered. So I'm incredibly protective of them. And every single one of them, you know, wants to try to help and do the right thing. They each have their own sort of approach, but they want to do the right thing. They they want to do the right thing. They want to help other survivors in some cases. They want to help on the different cases. They want to help folks that are struggling with similar cases, different cases. It's quite something, really. There's a lot of what I would call sort of a more true nobility of character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I suppose that comes about of experiencing this kind of pain and hardship and horror in many cases. I suppose if you're a survivor of something so horrible and you manage to get through it, then you don't take goodness or doing the right thing for granted. It becomes very important to you because you know how life can go off the rails if we don't honor those things, if we don't honor goodness, doing the right thing, if we don't honor
Mhm.
integrity, morality, then there's no limit to the evil that people are capable of. So I would suppose these survivors understand that better than anyone.
Well, there's certainly the understanding that comes from those sort of experiences, and there's another understanding which is about an attentiveness to such experiences. And it's
That attentiveness and that involvement, it must take an emotional toll. I mean, listening to Sasha recount these horrific experiences, it takes an emotional toll on people. I experienced it. I read it all the time in comments on my videos. Um, I've said it before. I'll say it again now. It changed my perspective on this world, and I know it's done that for a lot of people. How has hearing about these events directly from Sasha impacted you?
well, I had some familiarity. I've worked on a lot of cases, and I've heard a lot of stories of horror. So I wasn't surprised. I'm always saddened that there's such evil, but contextually, evil, the extent of evil is the evil individuals. John Wayne Gacy died. John Wayne Gacy doesn't exist anymore. So how John Gacy, there's one less evil individual. Not to, just to speak quite plainly. Um, I've heard a lot of stories, and some even more horrifying than Sasha's recently. Individuals that have suffered just horrifically, and that have seen horrific suffering on scale that a lot of folks, aren't aware. And there's a few things I'd like to say. One is that it's very important, the hearing of some of these stories. but it's very important to listen in the right way. Like in some stories that'll some of the interviews I'll publish, we've already looked at, ensuring that there's 1-800 numbers that folks can call if they need to talk to somebody to help them to contextualize. I think something that was so abhorrent about the recent Epstein document drop was that, millions of files without any context, without any even a summary to help individuals to go through the documents, is like a premeditated psyop to distress individuals worldwide. I just think it was handled just atrociously. So, from my perspective, when I look at these interviews, survivor, supporter, and evidence security and safety is paramount. And I'll only publish what I think is truly helpful, what is truly helpful. And,
Hmm.
it's material that I'm publishing freely so that decent folks have the opportunity to listen and hear these experiences articulated, unfettered,
Mm.
and to discern the truth themselves is very, very important. In terms of how I handle hearing these stories, like I say, I've got a lot of experience, and I make sure that I spend time on what I love. I make sure that I spend time laughing. I spend time on what I'm joyful about: snorkeling, surfing, tinkering, um, visiting with good folks, including the survivors. It's very important contextually, when I'm speaking to these folks, these are folks that I'm helping and that I experience a genuine rapport with,
Hmm.
we're fighting shoulder to shoulder. And we have lots of conversations. Lots of the survivors want to help, they want to volunteer in other capacities. And I treat them with dignity and respect. I don't consider any of them broken. I
Hmm.
consider them as warriors that have gone through extreme difficulties and gotten through.
Hmm.
And that's quite fundamental to a lot of, your questions. It's like to treat folks with dignity and respect is so simple and straightforward and so immense in in the goodness that comes from that. I mean, wondrous goodness, grounded, practical, pragmatic, tactical. And certainly some of what I've heard, even when I know the details already, is been difficult. This been difficult, some of the cases. Um, but like I say, I spend time doing what I love that I know is nourishing and grounding every day on a daily basis. It's important, and it helps.
I think that this issue is so important that as you were kind of going down your list there, I think when I publish this interview, certainly, well, on Substack and on YouTube, I'm going to include, if you don't mind, Lisa's list of things that we can all do to safeguard our own mental health.
I
Um,
think that would be wonderful.
right? These are very dark things that you're dealing with, and that by extension we're all dealing with. They've always existed, and that's why sometimes I say that the world hasn't changed, but how you see it will. So, having said that, we all have to take steps to safeguard our own health and well-being, especially our mental health. So, yeah, I'll get you to even put a little more time in that and create kind of a comprehensive list, things that you can do on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis to safeguard your health and your well-being. Um, I think we really need to take some time to address that.
And something important regarding the English language word world is like there's, the so-called human world, and there's lots that's unnatural about how lots of so-called humans behave. And then there's the natural world. And there's a broader sense of the world, the natural world, how when good folks behave naturally, they're behaving more in accordance with the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't there aren't any malevolent plants, there aren't any malevolent animals, there isn't any malevolent oceans. So it's very important, I find, to spend time to step away from the idea of human civilizations, of what humanity is, and to just spend time listening in the wilderness, in a quiet park, sitting in a park bench, to just sit, by the shores of an ocean, a lake, a stream, a creek, to sit quietly on a stoop in a city full of asphalt. There's still air you're inhaling,
Mm-hmm.
there's birds singing. It's so important to remember and to look at how harmonious everything is. The only real disruption to the harmony is unnatural human behavior.
Yeah, you're reminding me a bit of, I believe, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who spoke about the noble beast.
Mm,
And Rousseau's theory was that basically we're noble by nature, but society tends to corrupt us.
mm.
This brings us to the questions and concerns segment. Um, Lisa, I know that your insight into Sasha's story extends far beyond just the contents of your 6 recorded interviews. So maybe you could help clarify some of the more challenging questions that I know I at times get from commenters on my videos. Would that be okay? Are you up for that?
Yes, sure.
I'll just remind everybody some of these questions are from people who perhaps have not listened to all 6 interviews. Not everyone listens carefully. And of course, very few people will take notes while listening. So some of the answers to these questions are possibly contained right there in the interviews. But we will nonetheless approach the questions and concerns segment, the questions and concerns round, with patience and understanding and a spirit of goodwill. And I know that's what you're all about, Lisa. So if that's okay with you, I'll get to the first question.
Okay.
Okay, so right off the bat, I get a lot of questions around the issue of Sasha's survival, given the nature of Sasha's allegations, the alleged interactions with the likes of Donald Trump, Andy Biggs, Jim Jordan, and others. Many people can't help but ask, if these allegations are true, then how is it that Sasha has been allowed to live?
That's a good question. First, I'll just say there's something higher, and that's
Mm-hmm.
all I'm
Mm-hmm.
comfortable to speak about on such a subject. And then there's the nuts and bolts of, you know, Sasha's experience. Sasha's dad, and Sasha's grandfather were affiliated with Dixie Mafia. Sasha's grandfather did a lot of what they call cleanup work, silencing individuals. In fact, there's a town somewhere in the United States where there's a lot of greenery, plants, beautiful exotic plants, because Sasha's grandfather was married to a woman who had studied botany and loved plants. And so whenever he would do his cleanup work, he would tell the individuals that he didn't kill to plant some plants for his wife.
Mm.
And, Dixie Mafia, it's back Ku Klux Klan, a lot of crossover. And, that's how some of how Sasha was raised, with Paul and then with William Kyle. And I do think that's certainly a factor at play in regards to how much information William Kyle was aware of, how much Paul might have been aware of, and how he might have protected himself in some regards. And then there's how much Sasha was aware of. I find with these cases, there's victims that are thought of as relatives that they don't want to kill unless they have to. And then there's
Hmm.
victims that they think of as specifically expendable. And as horrifying as this is, that are groomed to get murdered. Runaways, kidnapping victims, um, lots of victims that are undocumented, victims that they even um, cultivate for murder. And
Hmm.
then there's individuals that some are thought of as relatives that don't that they don't want to kill. They want to involve somehow, whether they want pervertedly a witness to some of their crimes in some cases with some of the victims, or even in Sasha's case where reasonable question, did William Kyle sort of think of Sasha as much as he'd committed these crimes of trafficking him? Did he want him? Did he still sort of think of him like a son? The incident Sasha describes with Andy Biggs, there's an argument where William Kyle says, I told you you could hurt him. I didn't say you could kill him.
Yeah,
And, that was one of the last incidents that Sasha recalls of getting trafficked within the ring. So it's a reasonable question, and it's an important question to ask and to continue asking.
that brings me back to that moment where Sasha was brought back to receive the punishment for what occurred with Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there wasn't any other abuse from what Sasha can remember. That I'm not entirely straight on when the beach incident with the riptide occurred, but it did seem, no, that was before. I believe that was before. So it did seem that CPS, Child Protective Services, and the police, both by that time, they had their eye on Sasha Riley and
Mm-hmm.
William Kyle Riley, Sasha's adoptive father.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that had a lot to do with.
Certainly, there were several CPS investigations, and there was two FBI investigations. We've been trying to get copies of those reports, and William Kyle was investigated twice by the FBI during the 1980s. Once was regarding child pornography. Another
Mhm.
couple had been um, filmed. They worked on films, pornography films, and the other couple was charged. I think there was some specific evidence. It was like, the color of the carpet was similar to the
Mhm.
carpet in the film, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge William Kyle or Murray Lynn Riley. And another case was regarding Samantha, who was murdered.
Mhm.
There was some neighbors had heard screams coming from the residence, and police were called in. There was investigation. I have to, you know, check through some of my background notes at what point the FBI was involved, but there was some investigation, and they'd already disposed of Samantha's corpse. So apparently, there was some blood found in the room where Sasha and Samantha were locked up when they weren't getting tortured, but there wasn't a corpse to link. There wasn't a corpse. And I think William Kyle had stopped Sasha from talking to any of the police officers. Uh, William Kyle had told the police officers that Samantha had been there and that Samantha was a runaway and had just run away again. So
Oh my goodness.
those specific incidents, as well as the CPS reports, certainly would have had an impact. William Kyle was scared of getting caught. And William Kyle had a tendency, his sort of patterns of attacking, patterns of cleanup, was to kind of go one or two states over. Sort of a Dixie Murphy general sort of rule of thumb is to uh, don't poop in your nest. So, when he
Mm-hmm.
was Georgia, he was going into the adjacent states and using sort of taking advantage of jurisdictions per state to evade law enforcement that wasn't corrupt.
You remind me another issue that probably contributed to Sasha remaining alive is that when it came to Samantha, if I recall correctly, Sasha was, as an act of compassion, at Samantha's request. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sasha ended up ending Samantha's life
Mm-hmm.
At her request. She was in really bad shape and didn't want someone malevolent to end her life. She wanted somebody that she knew was a good person and held no malice towards her, to just, as an act of compassion, end her life. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, yes. The circumstances. Sasha had a lovely friendship with Samantha, and Samantha had always wanted to be a dancer. And
Mm-hmm.
when William Kyle and Marie Lynn they purchased Samantha from the brothel. Sasha's recollection was a fee of $500, and was because of the popularity of one of the films
Mm-hmm.
that Sasha and Samantha had been forced to participate in the filming of.
Mm-hmm.
William Kyle was afraid the film's popularity would draw attention to William Kyle and to the ring at large. And so they purchased Samantha in order to torture and murder Samantha. And like I say, Samantha loved to dance. Samantha had dreams of
Mm-hmm.
one day getting away, and that Samantha maybe would be able to perform ballet in New York or work on Broadway. And when they tortured Samantha, after some period of time, it was like about a couple of weeks, at some point they cut off Samantha's toes. And that's when Samantha lost the will to live. And, Sasha said that Samantha was really in a bad way. I know how much Samantha was suffering. And Sasha said Samantha told Sasha that she couldn't bear to go and back into the room one more time and get tortured by them. And they were going to torture her until she died. And something that, and this is quite gruesome, but it's important detail, and it's similar in a lot of the cases. A lot of the pedophiles like to dismember the children before they murder them. The only cases that I'm working on where there's cases where children were dismembered after murder was with disposing of corpse or eating of specific body parts in cases of cannibalistic abuse.
Yeah, I must say, it's hard to go on to another question after hearing that.
Are you okay?
Your mind becomes almost erased. You forget where you are, who you are, what you were just doing, what you were talking about, because you get transported to that moment. And given that, you're right, it's important context, because with that, I think anyone could understand why Sasha, when asked, would have ended Samantha's life in a compassionate way. I believe he strangled her. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
and he talked. I've spoken to Sasha a lot. He didn't like know how, so said
Mm-hmm.
that Samantha talked to him a lot during the course of several hours to try to tell him how. It's horrific. It's horrific.
Yeah. But then that invariably must have contributed in some part, either in large part or in a small part, to why Sasha managed to live, because now William Kyle Riley was able to say, well, you can't tell on us now because you've done it too. You've murdered someone.
Yeah.
You're a murderer. So you better not tell on us or we'll tell on you.
Yeah, and that's a common tactic amongst pedophiles in the network, is to try to find to whether they would sometimes use drugs to drug some of the victims, to incite them to behave drugged or to have no memory of how they behaved, and then film them
Mm-hmm.
and then attempt to coerce them by saying,
Yeah.
here's footage, look what you did. Similar circumstances. And in fact, that's actually, um, ironically, how a lot of the pedophiles are baited.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals like Jess Staley, you know, they filmed them, they'd
Mm-hmm.
use the material against them to try to get them to go along with, the specifics regarding the different individuals that were blackmailing them. And, there's lots of blackmailers, lots of different agendas, lots of different countries.
Yeah.
So it's ironic that they used the tactics on the pedophiles that they used on the victims to try to get them uh, to coerce them into supporting the network in some capacity or to staying silent.
Well, speaking of the network, that brings me to my next question. I will, at times, certainly more than once, have someone say, oh, isn't this convenient? Just as Bill Clinton is being asked to testify, this story comes out of the woodwork. What do you say to those people who say, why are we just hearing about this now?
Yeah, those questions have come up. Well, pedophilia isn't political. Um, Murder isn't political. Committing of crimes isn't political, though some of the individuals that have committed crimes have specific political affiliations and political agendas, and there are some individuals, some perpetrators that are all about the politics. My perspective is, it's fairly straightforward. Sasha talked about the individuals that Sasha was willing to testify in the Bible about, the individuals that Sasha most recalls as the most dangerous and harmful to Sasha. And Sasha knows there was lots of perpetrators, but Sasha's memories, he's like he's focused on what he remembers the most and can swear on the Bible about, or that he would take a polygraph test about. And I think something important regarding Donald Trump voted Democrat during 8 years at some point. So again, the case doesn't have anything at all to do with
Mm-hmm.
politics, really. The fact, unfortunately, is that there are more Republicans that participated in the network during specific years than Democrats. And, there's obviously some Democrats that have been listed in Epstein documents. And I'm not going to speak about any of those cases, because again, there's so much misdis and malinformation. There's such extreme psyops that a lot of the pedophiles in the network have been involved in and have been complicit in attempting to run to distract individuals is quite unfortunate because, I know there was a time when, 40, 50 years ago, a lot of the Republicans behaved quite different. It's
Hmm.
almost
Hmm.
tragedy,
I agree.
that the Republican Party has been so
Yeah.
tainted by a handful of greedy, grubby
Yeah.
pedophiles and their conspirators.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree. I don't think we have to go too far back, actually, to find
Yeah.
those kinds of Republicans. And I I acknowledge that there are probably plenty of very good people who are Republicans. Of course, there are good people amongst the voting public who are Republicans. I was a card carrying conservative myself, for, up till about I don't know 10 years ago, or yeah, something like
Hmm.
actually more recently than that. Um, it Yeah, you're right. It's not an issue of
I've always described myself as more fiscally
yeah,
conservative
right,
and
and that's why I was conservative.
progressive,
It was the fiscal.
so-called socially
Exactly.
progressive.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. But the funny thing is, I mean, this is a sidebar. I won't go down it very, very long. But even when you look at the fiscal aspect in the long run, over the long run, in both the United States and in Canada, and you and I are both Canadian, just to highlight that for the viewing public. Um, Over the long run, Republicans and conservatives have been the worst for the public debt. The only government,
I know that's quite an
right?
irony considering the positioning is on fiscal conservatism, but the
Yeah.
practice haven't behaved fiscally conservative in
But
decades.
when you really think about it and you look into it, it makes total sense because public debt is money that is owed by the public to somebody, to the holders of bonds. Who holds bonds? Rich people. It's the
Mm.
standard practice. Socialize costs, privatize profit.
Well,
That's the game plan behind the
mm,
conservative political movement.
mm,
So, that is a sidebar. I won't go down
mm.
it for very long. Um, how about I'll ask you another question that I get from commenters, and that is, and I believe it's something you've already answered, and you've answered it quite well. But nonetheless, I've, you know, I want to honor the viewers of my videos who ask these questions. So a very popular question is, well, why not go to the police? Why didn't Sasha go to the police? So what do you say to that?
Well, Sasha did go to the police.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sasha, yeah, no, like in terms of the context, when Sasha went to the police, I think it was 2019, 2020. We're still waiting for a copy of the report. There's been all sorts of delays in terms of materials we've requested from some of the American government agencies getting sent in a timely fashion, unfortunately. Anyways, Sasha filed with the Lawton Police Department, and the case was referred on to OSBI, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. And Sasha never heard anything back from them at all. Now, I know that there's some corruption in the OSBI. That's something I've confirmed with other with it's something that I've confirmed that I'm careful
Mm-hmm.
speaking about, but
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly cases where in Oklahoma the cases seem to stall somewhere in OSBI. It was similar in several of the states. Some of the cases they stall in a specific police department. Some of the cases they stall, you know, at an agency like OSBI. In Sasha's case, so Sasha did report. The first time Sasha ever heard from anyone working in American law enforcement was a call from the FBI, and that was during uh, late July, early August 2025, after I'd spoken to Sasha. And when I spoke to Sasha, some of the first things I did was, I got secured evidence, secured all these documents, got copies with local police. I spoke to some of my allies internationally. I spoke to some individuals that had worked as lawyers, and I contacted some individuals in different governments internationally, sort of a call to warn and forewarn. And, I started contacting folks that I thought could assist, and I was already looking in terms of, at what point to move Sasha out of the United States, considering the context. And the first call that Sasha got from anyone in law enforcement was from the FBI. And the individual that called Sasha was still in the United States at the time. It was very weird. It's the individual said that he had a directive to contact Sasha about online
Mm-hmm.
posts, William Kyle Riley, and child pornography. But then the agent just sort of went through and was trying to get information from Sasha, and Sasha said to them something like, you guys should have all this information already. You did a couple of investigations of my dad during the
Mm-hmm.
80s. And it was enough of a concerning call that it was a definite red
Mm-hmm.
flag, because the FBI wasn't calling to help at all. So I did some assessments, and then I spoke to some folks such as the Archdeacon, and we're like, no, it's time to move him. So I moved Sasha within a day out of the country. And he was contacted again by the FBI. And the second call, which was very bizarre, very strange timing, was another agent. And it was the day after Charlie Kirk was murdered. And the agent called under similar pretext. Oh, the agent wanted to just hear about the case and what was going on. And Sasha said Sasha had a red flag. That was a weird call. And, they asked Sasha's
Mm-hmm.
location. And Sasha didn't tell him exactly, but obviously Sasha did mention that Sasha wasn't in the country. And, again, it was deeply alarming. And, since then, there has been a very odd out of mandate conduct once, not from the FBI again, but his real estate agent was contacted by a Secret Service agent, Anthony Bradshaw.
Mm-hmm.
And the Secret Service mandate is very, very specific and explicit, and it was clear that Anthony Bradshaw was operating outside of the bounds of the Secret Service mandate. Some of the folks who work with me that assist are there's lots of retired veterans, really good, decent
Mm-hmm.
folks, American veterans, some Canadian veterans that are very committed. That I call them my knights at large, my ninjas at large. And they had some familiarity with Anthony Bradshaw and said he's evil, works out of Oklahoma, is really close to Trump, and they were quite concerned that Bradshaw would in any way be sniffing around. They thought Bradshaw was already harassing just by contacting the real estate agent. So,
Well, I have to admit, I get a lot of people expressing concern not only for Sasha's safety but for yours as well. Are you afraid? You know,
no, not.
why not? How how are you not afraid?
I'm
Mm-hmm.
reasonable. And when I look truly, honestly, pedophiles are weak just by the fact of the pedophiles'
Mm-hmm.
crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Pedophiles are weak, and I refuse to experience any opinion of fear of the weak. Individuals that are truly empowered do not commit crimes or even attempt to commit crimes. The truly powerful do not commit or attempt to commit crimes. I refuse to behave like I should experience fear at
Mm-hmm.
all of pedophiles and of pedophiles'
Mm-hmm.
enablers. Now, I'm quite rigorous about security, my own security approaches. I'm extremely protective of all of the survivors and supporters that I'm helping and that are working with me and for me in different capacities. And we've certainly increased security. We have security protocols. You know, we have security firms we've engaged with and have, you know, we're quite rigorous about. There's individuals that I've moved out of the country already besides Sasha. And you know, there's supporters that I've moved to different locations as well because they had some concerns.
Well, it's good to know. I again a comment. I find myself writing a lot in response to other comments. Is we're all hoping and praying for Sasha's continued safety and well being. But it's quite amazing to hear that you're exercising that same degree of diligence and caution for a number of survivors and people who are peripherally perhaps related to this issue. Let me ask you this: are there any common questions that you get? Because I know you get a lot of comments. Are there any common questions that you might like to take this opportunity to address?
Let me see. Well, I'm I've gotten mostly positive
Mm-hmm.
comments in terms of folks that actually contact me directly. Um, I'm very careful regarding social media. I know that the social media has really been used by bad actors as a theater of thug warfare since several years ago. And I've always been cautious with social media. Social media, I was, you know, during the 1990s, you know, I tried to describe um, internet developments and so on. And social media is something I pioneered. I used to call individualized media. In fact, I'll see if I can find one of my digital reports, MoCo reports, and I'll send you. It's interesting
Yeah, that'd be great.
context. So I looked at what was positive of internet developments and what was negative. And I think there is positive, much positive, and the negative is quite horrific. You know, attempts to mind control, algorithmic terrorism, the sort of the use of algorithms to try to induce mind control responses and victims being some of the
Mm.
worst. So I'm careful. I try to spend time, you know, and I respond to folks that are genuinely trying to understand. And I try to help them understand, you know, that I think that's something, my generosity in such a regard, you know, folks that have spent more time with me understand and are appreciative. I think some folks that don't know me, they're like, who is Lisa Noelle Voldeng? They cannot
Mm-hmm.
comprehend um, my generosity. I think it's just foreign to them.
Yeah, you probably
So
get questions every now and then. What's in it for you? Why are you doing this?
interestingly, I'm laughing because I find most folks don't ask me those questions
And that's good.
directly.
That's a
Those
good thing.
questions usually seem to come up in the context of attempts to discredit me amongst other people. I haven't been asked those sort of questions directly. The questions I'm asked are quite different. It's usually honestly, how can I help?
Right.
Or I have a similar story to Sasha's, and I'd like to talk to you and thank you. Or it's comments like, you know, thank you for providing us and the public the opportunity to hear what we've longed to hear so that we can better understand evil and we can stand up.
Yeah. I
So,
I get what you're saying. Very few people would say these questions to your face, but you'll catch wind of them secondhand, a comment to a comment,
oh my
you
goodness.
know. I see them every now and then, but they are rare. They are rare. Uh, I would say
Mhm.
honestly, 99% of comments are positive and supportive and loving. The love that, that I wish I
It's
could,
extraordinary.
right?
It's so extraordinary. I'm so humbled and honored, and it's really quite something to behold,
Yeah,
honestly.
it is. I often wish Sasha could be reading these comments, because I'm getting these comments on my videos, and well, I'll trust that someday, Sasha will have the opportunity to read those. But they're very supportive, very loving. It's quite incredible.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, let me move us along to the moving forward round, where I'll ask you a couple of questions about what you're working on now, what comes next, if that's all right.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the initial article you posted on Substack that broke this story is entitled "Don't Worry, Boys Are Hard to Find," part one of two. And I can tell you, again, from the comments, part two has been highly anticipated. Now, I understand that you are having to modify your plans to release part two, or at least your vision of what part two might look like. Can you tell me a bit about what's going on there with part two?
Yeah, I decided not to publish part two. And
Mm,
contextually, what's important is part two, my plan had been to provide what was prudent of incidents mapped to evidence. And, after assessment, it was clear that um, wouldn't in any way be prudent to publish a part two, even regarding some evidence that just isn't in any way reasonable at all. I refuse to provide a roadmap to pedophiles to attempt to tamper with evidence. One of like the things that I was so concerned about last autumn, and why I was very careful about when I did publish and so on, is that, Fort Carson, there are military records, and we have requests in that there's folks that are retired Army colonels and JAGs that have been helping my team and I. And in terms of getting copies of Sasha's medical record, military records, including medical records, of which there is some specific evidence, and copies of the CSAM report, not the material itself, but
right,
the
right.
reports with
Yeah.
uh, Havel, the soldier who was court-martialed, because of the court-martial, the United States military policy is that the documents, including the CSAM, has to meet, uh, get stored in permanent records. So I contacted folks at Senator Wyden's office and at the House Oversight Committee Democrats' office, and told them that it was important, especially before the United States government shut down last autumn, to try
Hmm.
to get copies of the material, because I was concerned that the FBI might attempt to confiscate and tamper with or even destroy some of those material. So from that context, and certainly, some of the other cases, that has been a concern. And so part two isn't prudent at all. But I will obviously continue to publish updates on Sasha's case and even interviews. I'd like the interviews to focus more, um, not even so much interviews, but just conversations about where we'll talk about some of our approaches to behaving courageous. Those I think it's important to provide information that's uplifting and hopeful, and that folks, especially good folks that have experienced difficulties about hopelessness and despair, that they can hear and say, gosh, that's one simple thing they could try.
Hmm.
Just one simple thing that they could do that is like the difference between despair and hopefulness, genuine hopefulness, the difference between despair and some sense of standing taller and moving forward.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, when we first hear the set of 6 interviews that you conducted, I mean, really conversations. To my mind,
Mhm.
you're having conversations. We call them interviews, but they're conversations. Um,
Mhm.
naturally, again, I get so many comments about this, and which is why I asked about part 2. Naturally, people just go, "Wow, this is amazing. We have to get the evidence. Can we see the evidence, or is there any evidence?" And if your goal was to get views and likes and subscribers, then sure, you'd make a part 2 that showed, well, here's the evidence we've collected so far. But I don't think that's your goal. Um, if your goal is to get this evidence eventually presented in a hearing or a court of law, and actually make an impact here, then you don't want to publish it. You don't want to give away what you're looking at, where you're looking. So
Yeah,
does that essentially
and
sum
and
up?
that's yeah, yeah. Although it's important to me to clarify regarding cases that cases is one tranche
Hmm. Hmm.
of the UN case, and any related cases internationally and so on is one tranche
Right,
of justice.
right,
And my goal is justice.
right.
The truth speaks for itself. Like I've said, justice will not wait,
Hmm.
and it's time.
It is time. Now, you've now filed a case related to all of this with the
Mhm.
United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Can you tell us how that will
Yes.
work?
I can tell you broadly that what
Hmm.
the plan is to move the case forward, not only with Sasha's case, but with multiple survivors. And I can say that there's probably 20 or 25 survivors that I'm helping right now that want to participate in a case with the UN and any other cases internationally. Survivors that, some that want to remain anonymous, some that contacted me specifically and asked and said, could they participate in the UN case? The UN case and any related international cases and so on are part of one tranche to
Right,
justice. One
right.
tranche to justice.
So, what are the other tranches? It begs the question.
No, it's a good question, and I'm extremely rigorous about my operational security. So we'll have to have an ongoing conversation about, and then as it's reasonable for me to speak about some of those things,
Hmm.
I'd love to speak to you more.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that could be the part 2, or the ongoing, the updates.
Yeah,
Um,
and
now,
some of what we've discussed today certainly was some sort of what what I had already drafted about case background with part two. So
yeah, no, that's true. And of course, Sue Selly has done tremendous work on investigating and digging into Sasha Riley's background, and just establishing that William Sascha Riley is a real person and really did serve in the military. Really was questioned about, CSAM material that was found to be in the
mhm,
possession of other personnel on the Fort Carson military base. So,
mhm,
that exists, and that's good because it changed the conversation from, oh, this is all fake, because that I heard that all the time. That this person doesn't even exist. I looked; they don't even exist. Well, that I think that dispensed entirely with that discussion, and changed the discussion to, all right, fair enough. This is a real
mhm.
person.
Yep, Sue's done
Let's
some
look at the
wonderful work.
allegations.
Sue's done
Yeah,
some wonderful work, and
yeah.
there's a lot of investigators that have worked on some similar corroborative investigations, which is really great. At some point, I'd like to provide like a list of some of those videos and backgrounders, and including some of your
Hmm.
work, which has been really helpful. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. As I often say, it's the least I could do. We are living in unprecedented times, and we must all do whatever we can. And this is something I can do, so I do it.
Thank you.
Not unlike yourself. Um, which
Which I love
brings
about
me,
you. Thank you.
well, you're very kind.
Good folks find good folks, you know?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Now, George Tonks found you very recently,
Mhm.
and now you've released a new piece on Substack entitled "He's Fine. They Threw Him in a Dumpster."
Yeah.
And that includes two interviews, pretty long interviews with George
Mhm.
Tonks. Um, can you tell us a bit about that? Because that's your most recent project, and I think you that just was released within about the past week or so.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. George had been contacted by lots of individuals that wanted to interview George. And after George had heard my conversations, recordings of my conversation with Sasha, George contacted me. And, he had a sense of trust that he could talk to me about what his experiences were that he, you know, wanted to get on the record specific to the cases that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
So George is one of the individuals that um, wants to participate in the UN case and any other cases. And so when I spoke to George, I said, let's focus. We had some discussion, and George doesn't want to conduct any interviews at all with anyone else. So George's perspective was like a one-time interview to talk about the facts of the case to the best of George's recollection. So similar approach like with Sasha. There's I wanted George to be able to talk specifically about what George had experienced during the late 70s, early 80s, specifically when George was trafficked. And again, it's very important. Um, Lots of reasons. George is worthy of justice.
Mm-hmm.
George has been the subject of a lot of attempts to discredit. George, was indicted and spent time in prison. And whatever crimes George committed or didn't commit, George is worthy of justice. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
unflinching about such facts, especially because George had been the subject of a lot of attempts to discredit George when George refused to participate in some of the lawyers, such as Brad Edwards, attempts to blackmail and extort and coerce victims to toe the lawyer's opinion of a false narrative or a mischaracterized narrative in order to get bigger payouts from companies like JP Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and George George has had some discussions with different victims. The lawyers attempted to pit some of the victims against each other, and those are issues that George has talked about already. Like I say, my focus is on what George was a victim of during the late 70s, early 80s. And it's specifically important because of Wexner's involvement in the Trump Epstein ring and because of Wexner's attempts to avoid accountability and cover up crimes even now, which again is one of the reasons I decided to publish the interviews last Wednesday, because I knew
Mm-hmm.
that Wexner had already been talking to lawyers about attempting to present Wexner as a victim and to attempt to frame the questioning on girls and young girls when during lots of years, Mr. Wexner did not experience any interest in young girls at all. Obviously, George's um, discussions with me are indicative of. And there's other survivors. So again, it's you know another case where there should have been investigation already. George reported some incidents involving Alan Kramer and Leslie Wexner to the Mexican consulate during the 1980s, and a lot of difficulties George experienced were since reporting. George was warned not to report. It's there's similarities to George. There's similarities between George and Sasha. And again, like I said, and I've said clearly, that a system that demonizes victim credibility is demonic.
Mm.
System where the credibility of the victim is a requisite or prerequisite for pursuing an investigation is a fallacy. A system where the credibility of the victim is demonized is demonic.
It seems to me there's just a simple issue of logic, which is how I tend to approach these things. It seems to me George Tonks had the opportunity to make money off of this and turned it down.
Mm-hmm.
So that dispenses with any notion that, oh, you're just doing this to jack some rich guy up against the wall for some money.
Yeah.
And the same could be said for William Sascha Riley. I'd point out that according to Sasha has been posting about this online for 10 years. So it's not just related to, Donald Trump's present term in office. And then I have personally been able to go verify that Sasha posted a very detailed account of what happened, what allegedly occurred with Donald Trump. That was posted on Facebook, I believe, in September of 2021. That was during Biden's term, near the beginning of Biden's term. So when people say, these folks are just whatever, they're doing it for political reasons, well, that doesn't add up. They're doing it for money, that doesn't add up. You wouldn't make it public and then try to blackmail someone. You'd keep it quiet and say, hey, give me some money or I'll make this public. So that logically it doesn't make sense to me. I these witnesses, both Sasha and George, they seem very credible, but also there's the logic side of things. It doesn't make sense that they're doing it for political reasons or for financial gain. None of that makes sense. So that's why I put a lot of stock in to what these witnesses are saying.
Well, like a lot of the survivors have said, believe the survivors. And what I try to focus on, again, is discernment. Folks of conscience are capable of discerning the truth, and discernment is critical.
And I suppose, it's that ability that you have to discern the truth that has kind of made you, the way I see it, you seem to be like a lighthouse for individuals who are navigating a very dark storm and have been for most of their lives. And somehow you've provided this light in the darkness, this kind of safe harbor for these individuals who have been dealing with the most horrific experiences. To end this interview off on a more inspirational note, is there anything that any advice that you could offer, any suggestions that you could make for the rest of us who we don't all know survivors of such horrific abuse, but we know people who are experiencing very difficult things in their lives. If not now, well, we will. Any suggestions that you can make for how we could all provide safe harbor for the people in our lives who may need refuge every now and then from the storm.
Thank you, and thank you for asking. I think, and I was saying thank you about what you had said. I appreciate very much.
Well, it's true.
I think, thank you, thank you. It's I help.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I took note of that line in your first, not your first article, but the first article that drew my attention to your account on Substack. You said something like, he needed help, I helped. That's what I do.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think in answer to your question, what's quite important, I think that I want to say first is that to listen, to genuinely listen, you know, when you sense that there's someone good and decent that is struggling, that needs help in some way, often it's just to listen, to treat them with dignity and respect by listening to them without
Mm-hmm.
judgment, without
Mm-hmm.
behaving judgmental, to listen, genuinely listen. So many, and not just survivors regarding, the pedophile network, so many of the folks that I've spoken to that have struggled, they just want to be seen. They want to experience safety to talk about what they've experienced. They want decent folks to take the time to just to see them, to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's like to listen and just hold, if you're somebody you're talking to face, to hold their hand and just listen quietly, to hug them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it might be a situation in the course of an individual's work, if they're working in EMT, paramedics, there's specific approaches to listening to folks that have experienced trauma, and really is a lot about listening, of behaving attentive and present, and so importantly, regarding treating folks with dignity and respect, do not assume that they're broken.
Mm-hmm.
To
Which
treat them
I might
like
have made that mistake.
warriors
Yeah.
who've gone through
Yeah.
difficulties, that have experienced some injuries regarding what they've suffered, but they aren't in any way broken. From my perspective, the only broken are the criminals.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right about that. Wow. Well, Lisa, I don't even know what to say. You have completely immersed yourself in an issue that is so difficult to even accept, let alone deal with and address in a meaningful, in a positive, in a constructive way. Um, Obviously, most people would have turned a blind eye because that's what most people have been doing for decades. Most would have walked away, but you didn't. So I can't thank you enough for what you have done and what you are doing for Sasha Riley, George Tonks, so many other survivors, to elevate the profile of this incredibly dark but important topic. And of course, Lisa, I thank you very much for taking the time to talk about this with me today.
Thank you, Art, and thank you for all of your good works. I appreciate you immensely.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been speaking with Lisa Noelle Voldeng, entrepreneur, investor, author, and advocate. Lisa is responsible for breaking the William Sascha Riley story. If you haven't heard that story, you will. And that is thanks to Lisa. You can find Lisa Noelle Voldeng on Substack at @lvoldeng. You can find Lisa on Instagram at @lvoldeng and on her website at www.voldeng.com. You can be sure that as Lisa learns more and accomplishes more with respect to the William Sascha Riley story and other stories that are horrifically all too similar, she will continue to share what she can. So be sure to follow her on whatever platforms you might happen to use. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Art Lightstone, and this is Policy Watch. I'll see you in the next one.